All right, so breaking into the news today, we'll talk about Bitcoin, we'll break down some Ethereum, and also take a look at a handful of altcoins and where the trajectory may be going. Bitcoin, of course, holding around 28K, so we'll get a chance to break down some trades for you today. It's going to be a fun one. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. Joining me today is, of course, Mr. Tom Crown coming in. Again, great to have you back, Tom.
Great to be here, Paul. Thanks for having me on again.
You bet. All right, so we're going to get a chance to break down a little bit of Bitcoin news. We'll also take a look at the Bitcoin chart, take a look at where you see some of the trades going. For some of you guys, if you do not follow Tom, you should. Let me just pop over to his YouTube channel, just so you know. You can find him right over there, at Tom Crown. On YouTube, he does a great job at kind of breaking down things for people, not only getting into Bitcoin and crypto in general for the first time, but also he does a really good job at breaking down charts, which is why we have him on the show. So thanks for coming in today, man. We appreciate it. Hey, Tom, we're going to get in. Yeah, we're going to get into a couple of things here. One is, this was an interesting article. I thought, all right, let's play. We'll play the game here, and that is, nobody will get rich investing in Bitcoin ever again. This started sparking a debate on Twitter. We saw a lot of people going back and forth on it. It's not early. The boat has sailed. Only people will get rich with Bitcoin, those selling on Bitcoin services. Bitcoin is now for wealth preservation. Maybe possible some truth there. And then when another user commented, the analyst expressing his opinion on Bitcoin still has the potential to 10x from around the 55 or 15.5 region. Then you have the situation right here happening with Tim Draper. And just to frame up Tim Draper is a legendary investor in Silicon Valley, and he was actually being interviewed on the Ledger podcast. Listen to what he had to say about this.
Sure. I mean, I am predicting $250,000 Bitcoin. I thought it would happen before June of this year. It might be extended a little bit, but we're on a run now. Maybe it does happen.
So Tim is in the camp that we are still seeing a lot of growth side and upside for Bitcoin. You've got the U.S. government coming in here, popping out 41K in Bitcoin, dropping almost 10,000 Bitcoin for about 250 million here just recently, end of March. So you've got some seized Bitcoin. This all came from the Silk Road confiscation. Still a lot happening. And then, of course, right here, Bitcoin has never made a new low after the monthly RSI, the RSI crossed 50. That one is an interesting statement. I'll kind of zoom in on that because some of you guys may not necessarily understand what that means, which is where Tom comes in. Tom, explain what we're looking at right there.
So I'm assuming that you said weekly RSI is relative strength index. That's a very basic, traditional, very used indicator. And all it's really doing is trying to judge up and down movements in relation to the previous ones. And so when we see RSI is low, they may call it what is called oversold. And when it's high, they might say it's overbought. In general, though, it's kind of a misunderstood indicator. It is relative. That's a really important thing. People try to use it not relative. They try to look at the whole thing. Even this example is maybe doing that. But I don't think it's a bad way, especially when you're very zoomed out to look at the chart. And I would love for that to be true, right? I personally don't believe that we're going to see a new low. But I also am very skeptical of anything that's kind of, this is always true. We just keep finding that Bitcoin has a way of breaking that.
Yes.
So fingers crossed, not this time, right?
When you look at the current charts, Tom, and what Bitcoin has been doing here around 28K, we saw it slip under the 28K mark yesterday, went into around the 27.5 mark. What are your strategies? Again, not investment advice, but how you're playing the market in terms of strategies for, is this a potential time for doing some acquisition? Or is this one of those times where we want to set back and wait a little bit if we are playing the market on a swing trade?
Well, the best advice, I think, and not financial advice, but the best life investing advice, I think, is everything is best done slow. DCA is such a solid approach that anyone can do that takes very little knowledge. It takes very little effort. And at these levels, at 28K, I think if you're a new investor, 28K, not a bad place to start DCAing. I mean, hopefully you had done it all last year or earlier this year, but slow entry, especially like I said, if you're new, going all in right here, just because, maybe I think it's going to go up. I don't think there's a new bottom. That isn't going to work for you emotionally. It's not going to work for you mentally. And so really, whatever you do, I think you should do it slow and do it in a way that you're not risking your quality of life. You're not risking tomorrow's rent or, food on your table.
Yeah. When you look at the chart, if you can, give us a peek into how you're seeing some of the, the analysis and some of the indicators play out for Bitcoin right now. We saw a nice move into has been a very strong zone in the 28,000. Do you think that 30K is in the cards?
I do think, and I actually have maybe some higher targets without getting people ramped up or, get eyes full of hopium. I don't think 30K is going to be the highest we go. And what do you want first? Should I show you more of like a zoomed out look, or more of maybe in the next, quarter two of this year look?
Yeah, let's look at the short term period right now.
Okay, let me zoom over. We have to do it this way because my camera's bad. If anyone watched my stream earlier, they know.
No problem.
So this is a pattern. This is a pattern I've been looking for. I shared it actually originally March 15th, 16th with BitBoy when I was on. And it's a bullish megaphone pattern. And I've included this little diagram here so everyone can kind of follow along, and I've labeled it. So price was back here when I started maybe identifying this pattern or looking for it. And despite the sell-offs we've seen, we've had some crazy news, FUD, the US government maybe selling some of the Silk Road Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't seem to care. It seems pretty in this pattern. And we broke through what was our ascending trend here, creating our fifth touch. We even came back on the 26th to test that as support. It has held so far. We've put in a higher high. Of course, chart reading is all about probability. It's all about trying to make the best move. It's never about knowing what will happen next. But if this pattern continues, I definitely am looking, you said the 30s, for a move, maybe even in early April to about 32.7, something like that, to complete this pattern. And I think that really sets the bigger chart up for a pretty healthy 2023.
Interesting. All right. So looking at a potential 32 range in April, outside of that, when you look at some of the macro indicators, some of the, the fundamentals that are driving the potential for uptake here, because I'm assuming this would be a little bit of some Bitcoin adoption with people that are starting to recognize, hey, there's a lot of turmoil happening in the banking system. There's many other, financial indicators that have kind of pushed people this way. Anything that you're watching that you feel helps drive to that? Or is it just still everybody kind of centralizing in on Bitcoin as Bitcoin's dominance rises?
That's a good question. I tend to not spend so much time focusing on why or how or I think there's a lot of value in doing it. It's just a really hard task that can take up a lot of time. And so I stay really technical, and I think that helps me remain a little bit less biased. But on a grander look of things, I think things look really good, and especially since the swing in March. So I'll show you the zoomed out chart. For those of you who weren't around in the 2018-19 bear market, we did kind of see something similar potentially to what we're seeing now. And I'll admit they're not identical, but we had a very strong rally off of a low of 3,100. It brought us all the way to 14K. And unfortunately, we ended up retesting the lows of March 2020. Lots of people like to dismiss that as a black swan. I would agree, but the chart is what it is. And so if we zoom out even a little more and put it kind of on a monthly time frame, I think it gets a little more simple. So what we have here is our all-time high. We fell for about a year and then just absolutely collapsed. And what this did was create what I like to call inefficient price action. Efficient price action is up and down, healthily moving to levels back and forth. Inefficient is when you really just get one direction, and you see this up and down. So if you look back here, like this was inefficient. And when we get that, the market typically looks to fill it back in. It doesn't all the time, but it does a lot of the time. And so that's kind of what I view 2019 as. It was inefficient price action that got filled. If you kind of zoom in, you'll see, this isn't the chart I thought it was. Oh no, that's okay. That's all right. We'll do it. It came back to basically the close of the all-time high. And what I'm looking for now is potentially for that to repeat. So in 2022, you guys probably remember, it was brutal. It was really just down. There was very inefficient price action. It went down. We had 2 months of the baby green candles and then down. And as of this month, we've made it past, I'll call the most local resistance area on the monthly. And that was about 23 to 25,000. But if you look here to April, May, June, this was pretty inefficient. And that could give us a target this year of up to around 48,000. And what's really kind of spicy about that is if you take the candles from 2019 and just place them now, it lines up pretty well with what we might expect. What I don't want people to think is that that's what's going to happen literally, and they, need to go all in because it's going to 48,000. It obviously could play out differently. This cycle has been very different from the previous cycles. In my opinion, I don't think it really lines up at all. So hopefully we see something different. Hopefully we can move past 48,000, but I am really looking for that 48,000 level this year. And that might be hopium to some, but I don't think it is. I think that's very reasonable. And if it does get there, there may still be an opportunity to get back in near the lows of this year. I don't think we'll see 15, but I could see if this plays out, price returning into the mid 20s, I think makes sense, to like kind of 25,000 psychological level, the one people maybe have been waiting for the last few weeks. Yeah, it all rhymes, right?
So possibly a retest down into 25, may get an adjustment, but still key things here. And I think this also aligns a lot with what we're tracking in our own power index, which has been an upline on sentiment. Bitcoin has been able to hold sentiment positive, both on the two layers of sentiment that we track, going up and kind of creating new local highs on sentiment as it continues to ramp up the chart. So it might work within line of what your prediction is around the 40K mark and playing out. Question will be, obviously, if we continue to see other macro factors that we track a lot on this channel, going forward. Let's jump over to ETH. So ETH's price prediction now falling below 1,800. Is it time to buy the dip? Right now, if you're trying to position with Ethereum, where do you see Ethereum's entry point? For maybe you're making your first trade on Ethereum, or you're maybe looking at another re-entry on Ethereum for a short-time hold. What are you looking at as potential target?
Yeah, so it's potential target. Ethereum, we're wrapping up our quarterlies today. So these are big candles closing. And I actually didn't look at Ethereum today during my stream. So this is, I'm learning alongside with you. This is the view of Ethereum on the quarter. And it does have the same inefficiency as Bitcoin, looking back at 2020. And that's all the way up at 3,600. Now, the only thing that I'm a little skeptical of is Ethereum is still below its previous high in was this Q3 of 22. And I think if we look back at Bitcoin on the 3-month, oh man, I hope I'm not wrong here. Yes, we've already eclipsed that high. So this is a little bit concerning. This isn't abandoned ship, but it's not quite in line with where Bitcoin is. And so I am a little afraid of that 2,000 mark. And I guess to balance out my bearishness there, breaking the 2,000 mark, you have very little in the way all the way up to 3,600. So there's a lot of upside there potentially. The problem is we're already at 18 and change. Well, if you have resistance and we're likely to see some kind of pullback at 2,000, that doesn't leave a lot of upside. That's a lot of crypto upside. That's about 10%. That's pretty big upside. The entries, though, are going to be hard. We saw Ethereum pull back very strongly in March. It went all the way down to 1377. That kind of looks like it was the entry. This candle has really reversed course. It's looking to close above August's close. That's going to be the highest close since May of 22. I do think Ethereum is moving up into that 2000, 2100 range, but I think it's going to be difficult to get an entry. If I had to take a guess, and of course, there's never a guarantee that we're going to see it, maybe high 16s, low 17s might be a decent place to look. Of course, I want to go back to the slow, driving home the slow, steady, not all in, not all out concepts. Anything can happen. March 2020, no one saw it coming. We could see something, hopefully not similar, but something happen that throws charts, wildly in different directions. We have a lot of stuff going on this year that we've never seen before. But yeah, to answer the question, 1700s ish, probably where I would look personally to take a trade. If that doesn't come and we move past 2000, there could be a breakout opportunity up to that 3,500 range as well. That's probably how I approach Ethereum.
There's been some interesting aspects to how social behavior, but also how the markets have responded, especially with what has happened with Bitcoin and to a certain extent Ethereum. And what I mean by that is we showed a tweet the other day where people are looking at FUD as being one of the driving forces. Most of that FUD has come from financial instability of the markets, the potential of the U.S. government getting more active on the regulatory front, pushing possibly more people into digital assets, as a side effect. And I would agree with that to a certain extent. I was looking at this article here. This is another thing that makes me think Ethereum might be a little softer. This was talking about, this was a great interview on Polygon, whether or not it would overtake Ethereum when it comes to economic activity. Their statement is that it's set to overtake Ethereum in terms of eco activity after the Layer 2 announced its ZK EVM upgrade. This was just here recently released. The difference that I look at is we've tracked Polygon, and it's a token that I've invested in, and then I did an exit. And the exit was all out, right almost at its most recent local high. The reason being is we were seeing some sentiment data that because normally what has happened with Polygon is sentiment would be trickling up with these little news drops. What happened though was that the market was no longer accepting that. So in my opinion, it was a scenario where Polygon had maxed out its capacity for kind of the network effect of moving. So that being the case, I would agree with you. We might see a little bit of a reentry point here on Ethereum going forward. The question will be whether or not it can really break out along with Bitcoin. Do you think that Ethereum, if Bitcoin does get on a run, let's say we get over the 30K mark, where do you feel Ethereum would be at that time?
So over 30K, I mean, probably at that 2100 range. I really think that's the kind of the pivot point for Ethereum right now. I'm kind of curious on your thoughts. So with the unlocking, the Shanghai upgrade and the unstaking, what are you guys seeing there? With I would be very curious actually of sentiment, because as someone kind of seasoned in crypto, I have my own opinions on it. But I'm curious what you're seeing in that aspect. Are people excited? Do they think it's positive or negative?
The indicator is actually positive in the sense that there might be more people entering, because of the fact that you're obviously not having to lock up anymore. But that is a factor that may play out in the more long term. The other thing is obviously the limitations of what the unlock would allow. And I think now the consensus is that we're going to see less exodus than what originally was thought. And I think that in itself has started to create a little bit of strength behind Ethereum. However, at the same time, we haven't necessarily seen this massive explosion and utility use case, which is really what I anticipated we'd see more of, versus what's happened in the market over the past couple of months has been, these bank implosions, which has caused this slight, flight to safety, which I believe a lot of people have moved into Bitcoin for that very purpose, and that's why we're seeing some activity.
This is wild times. People are fleeing bank accounts to the safety of crypto.
That's crazy.
If the time's not here, I don't know when the time is for crypto, right? That's insane.
I'm with you.
I love it.
I'm with you. Hey, listen, Tom, that's why we do these shows, man. I mean, we're believers in where this technology is going, and I think now what people are understanding is the cracks in the armor of the monetary system globally. I mean, if you look outside the United States and look at what China, Russia, and even the Saudis are doing with trying to go into the digital yuan as a reserve, it starts to paint a very interesting picture for the United States. Then you look at, we've done shows here recently on a lot of activity that's happening in DC, where that may take. And I still think now, because of the demographic that supports digital assets, and that's coming all the way in from NFTs, Ethereum, et cetera, gaming, I think there's going to be a lot more of that demographic moving into alternative monetary systems going forward. So I think we're going to see a lot of it. Speaking of that, Ripple, XRP, Ripple most likely could be on the verge of a win. And I say win, I should say somewhat of a win that necessarily would move the case to an absolute win, but it would move Ripple's position into a lot better position in terms of being relisted. What do you think about XRP and its recent run up here in terms of the charts? How does it show out? Do you think we are at our limit for XRP, or do you think there's a little bit more room to climb?
Yeah, so XRP has been on everyone's mind lately. You know, everyone's asking me every channel I go on, and I have been very pessimistic on XRP for a while, with the caveat of, well, it keeps making these moves and then it keeps not being able to break higher. We kind of saw it move to like 52 cents and then 48, and week after week it just kind of kept going down. It didn't seem able to take that 50-cent level. And I was on with the Investing Bros channel, I think earlier this week, and I said, if you can get above 55 cents, I'll change views. And since then it has gotten above 55 cents. So let me show the same stuff. So this is on the quarters again. I'm talking about quarterlies because it only happens 4 times a year. We just looked at Bitcoin and Ethereum. XRP is somewhere in the middle. It has broken its highs. It's looking for a very strong close here on the quarter. It's going to be the highest close since 2021 started, above 48 cents. And what I'm liking about this chart now is we're now down on the week. It was finally able to move past this move in September that it just seemed to be very afraid of. You know, it spent a very long time consolidating. I will say XRP held its lows impressively. Back even to May of 22, it barely broke below that, this entire time. It really managed to hold on to this 30 to 33 cent level. Now, unfortunately, I didn't see this. We do see this week is going to be wrapping up in 2 days, and it's right back to kind of where these candle closes are. That would be better if it closed above, like the quarterly is doing. That would be a pretty strong signal for XRP to make a move, I would say. Back, again, talking about that inefficiency in markets. We had very, very downward biased movement, consolidation. Now we're starting to see maybe some upward bias movement. And so the market, I think if we get a good close this week and on this quarter, is going to look to close that efficiency up here. And that puts it near $1, which is, I think, pretty exciting news if you're on Team XRP.
Yeah,
It
well,
probably
and you
lines
look
up
at
with the court case too, like you were saying.
Yeah,
it's probably favorable.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, if we get the summary judgment coming out of this, I think it does position for XRP. Granted, the SEC will file, a counter on that, but the point will be is that we're starting to see a judge and a court of law start to position this not as a security, which will be an interesting place. I think that in itself will have such a sentiment effect overall based on just the pent-up demand on what's happening with XRP. I think it'll be pretty huge. And if we get any exchange that really starts to go in and relist XRP, this thing could get pretty interesting pretty quick. So definitely watching that one as a whole. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Cardano and Solana. When you look at these two tokens, Solana has been, kind of up and down. We've been out of Solana for quite some time. We exited our Cardano position quite some time ago. But here recently, Cardano's had a nice little adjustment. Do you feel like Cardano could be in a situation right now where it starts to retrace?
Oh, back to the downside?
Yes, back to the downside.
Yeah, so let me pull up the quarterly charts. It's going to be a little repetitious. So interesting. Cardano actually looks the worst and the best, I feel like, at the same time. So unlike Bitcoin, unlike almost every other chart we looked at, it hasn't made it back to the previous quarter's high. Almost every other one we looked at today has. That would be around 43 cents. It really has been stuck in this 41 to 31 cent range for quite some time. And we actually really slayed it on my stream trading wise, just simple resistance support back and forth. And now this is down on the day. And so when I look at this, it hasn't broken its high. It hasn't come back to 41 cents. I do think there's a chance, we only have 4 hours left, but I do think there's a chance that it might see a rally into this quarterly close to maybe position it a little bit better, a little bit above its last quarter open. And if it can do that, it hasn't happened, but if it can do that, what we've been talking about, kind of the theme of that inefficiency, the reason I say it looks the worst and the best is, well, right now it doesn't look great with this candle, but it has just down. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 quarters of down, and it has just a huge gap above it. I'm not going to make a claim that it's going to $2.11, like sometime soon or tomorrow, but if it can get past 43, it doesn't have a ton above it. This is very inefficient. So It's kind of a paradox at the moment. It's bullish and bearish. It get above 43.5 cents, and I'll probably be looking for a long in 88 again.
There you go. Well, I think a lot of people play this, and I say that, meaning Cardano, play it that way. You really have to kind of flip on both sides because you have the Cardano lovers and you have the Cardano haters, out there within it. It's interesting. That is one of the most, I should say, one of the most passionate communities of all the ones that we track in projects, both on Metaverse and traditional altcoins. In general, just the amount of data that we have to sift through to get to actual sentiment data on Cardano is mind-boggling. So it's a good one. Tom, what are you watching today in terms of altcoins? Because many people are arguing whether or not we're going to see altcoins continue to bleed against Bitcoin's dominance. And if you look at dominance, I was just jumping on that chart. Let me kind of jump over to it. With Bitcoin dominance right now, still hovering at that 47 zone. I'll kind of bring that down just a little bit, but you can kind of see it kind of hit this plateau right here. Do you feel that we might be looking at a little bit more of a dip on Bitcoin dominance in the coming weeks, or do you feel like it still has some move to the upside?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question. So I showed you kind of the 2019 repeat earlier. And what's interesting is in 2019, we also saw dominance take off. We haven't seen that happen yet. So I have a kind of a spicy take on this. And that is right here. You can see peak bull market in 2018, peak bull market in 2022. And we are really just in that range. So at the moment, I think the market's undecided. And I've put these arrows here. Basically, I think if dominance breaks to the upside and we see Bitcoin move towards 48K, I think we are seeing a repeat of 2019 again. It would then fit really well. Unfortunately, that doesn't really bode well for alts. They didn't get slaughtered or necessarily in 2019. A lot of them traded sideways, maybe very marginal losses while Bitcoin gained, but they lost value against Bitcoin, and that's what this chart is showing us. On the other hand, I have this little arrow down here, and I think if you're right, or if many people have been talking about potentially dominance reversing, if we see it break to a new low, I think the 2019 repeat is out the window, and I think we see some kind of weird rejuvenation of a bull market. If dominance drops below 39%, I think we're going to see new all-time highs on Bitcoin faster than we would expect.
Yeah, that is the criteria that I think that is starting to set up right now, at least in our sentiment data. And if you guys aren't following our CPI, make sure and check it out. We always leave a link down below where we break out sentiment. And one thing that is evident, and we've showed many times on the show this week, is that the track record right now, sentiment for Bitcoin and Ethereum to a certain extent, but more so on Bitcoin, has eclipsed the overall market for the first time in about 6 months. And we're starting to see Bitcoin really start to see some accelerant here. If we see any kind of indicator that moves dominance up further, like your anticipation, kind of in the same point, Bitcoin could see some pretty heavy accelerant. Again, We kind of look at fundamentals and macro effects here on this channel quite a bit. What happens regulatory? What do we see on the global stage? For the most part, we think that has a lot of bearing along with sentiment. Then we look at charts, bring guys like you in, because I think the more information that you get out there as you guys are trading, you should be looking at all these different pieces. And charts are important, sentiment is important, macro and understanding the markets is super important. We're going to go over to our poll. I think we have a poll today. So we're going to do a poll real quick. I want to get your opinion on the poll too, because what will happen first, Tom? Bitcoin to 30K. That's pretty easy, I think. Bitcoin to 25. XRP to 60. It looks like Ethereum to 2. So everybody's in on you right now. Bitcoin is on its way in the elevator for sure. Even though we got a little bit of pullback here. Yeah,
it makes
I know,
me
right?
worry. We can't all agree, guys. We can't all agree. Even if we do, we have to pretend we don't.
What was the percentage breakdown on that poll? Let's bring it back. I want to see what the percentage was. I missed it. There, 48. Okay, 50% almost. But you got a little bit of a contrarian audience there that thinks we're going back to the 25 range, which would be the entry point that we were talking about earlier. Great re-entry, for Bitcoin. For those of you who are selling in the 28 zone, you probably are already starting to rethink your position on maybe going back in on Bitcoin as we just record this. Hey, we got a few questions here to jump in. Here we go. Jan says, government selling Bitcoin, time for liftoff. 10J says, Chainlink. We've had Chainlink on the CPI for quite some time. What are your thoughts on Chainlink much? Do you trade that one, Tom?
I have not traded Link in many a moon. Many a moon. I haven't looked at it even very much lately because, to my knowledge, it hasn't made a significant move in some time. It doesn't really reflect on it long term or anything, but just as a chart guy, I was talking kind of about XRP's highs and lows. We're just really contracting. And that's kind of what Link has been doing. I can try to pull it up here and let me take a peek.
I mean, it only had I say only, since the beginning of the year, it's had a 40% move, so it's nice for those who are, in on Link. And it's one that we don't necessarily have in our portfolio for the year. If you guys have not watched our portfolio show, we did it in January. We're going to be doing an update for the beginning of Q2. So next week, we're going to be updating our portfolio. We'll drop in and bring you guys in on that one. We got H-bar to the moon. Justin Irwin says, what time do the options expire today, and what's your personal opinion on what does Bitcoin do at the time in terms of months in, because we do have options expiry happening today, being the last of the month. Do you think that has any effect on the over the weekend trading?
Yeah, well, option expiries I've always kind of viewed, they're not super big in Bitcoin, at least to my knowledge. I don't trade options in that sense. So I don't think their impact is super huge, but I do believe they have an impact. I do look at the max pain price for expirations pretty regularly as an indicator. They're meh, but I think a pretty logical conclusion is whenever options are getting too hot or too one-sided into these big expirations, I think if the value there is less than basically it would take the market to move into, making them worthless, wherever direction that is. I think it happens. I mean, logically, if you're the market maker, you have to pay out these options. Well, if I can push price up or down 1%, make all these other contracts worthless, swoop that money up for less than it costs me to do that, I'm going to do that. That's just logical. I wouldn't put too much weight in them, but only that, that's my view.
Yeah. A couple of things here from Jen Smith that I thought were interesting. Will Bitcoin ETF happen this year? There's a lot of pressure here on the ETF. I think the key here, obviously, is the SEC. We had Gensler going in front of Congress this week for appropriations. We've got him going in front of Congress next week or 2 weeks from now based on his overreach. Whether or not we see an ETF, I think, is all dependent on how effective Grayscale is on trying to bring that to the courts, and I think that's the issue right now. Last question here. Jen Smith says, if more banks go down, would Bitcoin be the safety, or would people panic sell everything? What are your thoughts if we saw another major bank take a dive?
Well, I think the first thing we should say is, banks taking a dive isn't good for anyone. We don't want it to happen, but you know what? We also didn't make these decisions, and we have no control over whether it does or doesn't. So let's absolve ourselves there. One thing I always find interesting, because that's an emotional response, and we all have emotional responses. I'm not critiquing you, but it's an emotional thing. Will people panic sell? Well, think about it. You panic sell your Bitcoin into what? Dollars. And then where do your dollars go? Into the bank.
Into a bank.
So it's not a logical move. I think the more logical move would be the reverse. People panic selling dollars into crypto. And if we want to be kind of correlationists here, in the very, very brief time we've seen banks collapse, we've seen Bitcoin go up. Now, I wouldn't get super confident in that and expect huge rallies if it happens or when it happens again, which I think it will. The Fed has not, they didn't stop raising interest rates. They said that they will continue to raise them. I don't really believe them, because if they do, they are knowingly putting more banks under. So unless that's their goal, I don't know. I'm not going to draw those conclusions. I don't want to say it's bullish, because I just think it's overall a really bad thing, but I don't think it's bearish. There we go.
Yeah, well, I think it is an interesting thing, in the sense that I think it is more of a diversion into the centralized nature of banking in general. This is something I argue a lot, is that I feel like we're just getting to the point where, especially here in the United States, we're being herded, so to speak, into only a handful of banks. Once we get there, now you have a true ability to do a true choke point, especially on digital assets, if we see some sort of regulatory pressure, which is why I tell and I ask our guys out there that are watching the show, and if you are fans of Tom or anybody that really analyzes this space, the one thing you should be doing is talking to your lawmakers. And you have to go ahead, guys. I know you don't want to, but you should be picking up the phone and actually calling your congressman or woman, or jumping in on an email communication and letting them know your position out there. Because I think a lot of this going forward, especially in the next year, is going to be critical, 100%. Man. We're going to be dealing with some very interesting things happening as we really hurl toward our next president in next year. We're going to see a lot of alignment starting to play, and with our show yesterday where we were talking about Elizabeth Warren's crypto army. That's a real thing that's happening, guys. We got to be ready. So pay attention. It's a
wild time. Something is up. I think we can all agree something is up, right? I mean,
too many things hitting the fan.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're aware, you said you're talking about the centralization of banks. Since the 70s, the number of banks in the US has only gone down. Yeah. Only down. I think it was 14,000 in the 70s. Now we're in like the 6,000s. It's an obvious progression to centralization of the banks. I mean, the interesting thing to me is that they didn't blame the collapse on crypto. And I wonder if that's because they know if they blame it on crypto, that also means that crypto has the power to crash US banks. And so they're acknowledging the power of crypto. Something's happening here, and it's going to unfold, I think, this year. I don't think I answered about the ETF. I think we do see an ETF this year.
Interesting. Okay.
I hope so.
Again, Grayscale most likely going to be the one that possibly could get that position in. And to your point, on the banking side of it, if you look at Caitlin Long, her, and Custodia Bank, her attempt to go into a full reserve banking model and the swiftness in which they denied that showed, I think, a lot of people in the industry, from an analyst side and also just from the monetary system, that this is clearly, the jig is up, so to speak. They don't necessarily want a real bank that actually has your dollars 1-to-1 instead of fractional reserve. Oh my gosh, that's
fictional reserve. I dubbed it fictional reserve because there isn't any fraction. It's zero fraction.
Yeah, exactly. The IOU is there in the terms of service when you open up a bank account. Definitely a big one. Hey, Tom, it's always fun to break it up with you. As I said, if you guys are not following Tom Crown, make sure and reach out to him over on YouTube. He is definitely a legend out there as one of the great traders and analysts on the market. So stay with him. And of course, tell him we sent you over. Let him know it came from PBN. Tom, great having you on the show. Thanks so much for stopping in today.
Thank you, Paul. Great to be on again.
All right. See you later. All right. You guys are tuned in over on the podcast side of things. You just missed a whole show that looked at charts. And the idea behind some of these Friday shows, especially where we do kind of these weekend outlooks, is we break down charts a lot with traders and analysts. And sometimes we'll bring in other people. We actually had Peter Schiff on the schedule. Last minute change, he was unable to make it. Hopefully we'll get him back in, because I definitely think there's some great questions to answer around Bitcoin and gold, because they're looking at some very interesting units. So reach out to Peter. Let him know you need to come on the PBN show and chat it up with me. We'd love to have him back. If you guys are not in the Diamond Circle, make sure and get in. It's really easy and it's super cool, because you'll get a chance to get additional content. Hit the link down below. Of course, you can always reach me. It's out there on Twitter or on TikTok. On TikTok, it's @official Paul Barron. On Twitter, it's just @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechBath.